by really fast. Thank you. And let's see. I'm not gonna do roll call because we can see who's here. So Uni and Beatriz, thanks for joining. And since we have our new staff member here, Ronnie, maybe we can take a moment to let you introduce yourselves, and then Uni and Beatriz, since the group is so small, maybe if you could just introduce yourselves as well, and maybe just mention like why you're on this subcommittee in particular, like how your background relates to it. But Ronnie, I'll turn it over to you for a second to introduce yourself as our new staff member in the EJ program.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ronnie Kumar, and I am the new GIS analyst who will be working on the EJ program, and specifically in relation to EnviroScreen and helping with the maintenance and upkeep. And Morgan was the one who looped me in because my background is in data and GIS, so I'm just really excited to listen in and hear what the subcommittee is up to. And it is my 4th day, so I'm still very new. I'm excited to learn and be with you all here. But any questions you have for me, yeah, always available and excited to get to know everybody more.
Yeah, and we're super grateful to have Ronnie on board, like one of our very much anticipated staff members. So as Ronnie mentioned, she is our research and policy analyst. And so any like questions that the task force members have that are like data related, that like if you all need help with even coming out of the subcommittee, kind of wanting to do some like mapping or any sort of visuals that could be helpful to the full task force, that's like, as you as a task force member might be interested in, but don't have the capacity to take on, those are the types of projects that Ronnie could be able to help us out with. So, and yeah, Uni and Beatriz, if you don't mind, if you could just do a quick intro. We also have Brian here from CDOT. I just wanted to mention, while Marcia Nelson is not formally on this subcommittee, we have been sending the full subcommittee invitations to the full task force to see if anybody else that's like not formally on the subcommittee wants to join. Brian is stepping in for Marcia for the next few meetings. Marcia won't be able to make the full task force meeting next week. And so he's kind of stepping in to make sure that he can share CDOT's perspectives. The Colorado Department of Transportation's perspectives. And Brian is kind of a EJ subject matter expert at CDOT, and I think he's going to be great, a great addition to the task force. And just so folks know, Brian will not be a voting member. Proxies are not allowed on the task force, but he will be able to participate fully outside of voting. So yeah, Uni and Beatriz, if you want to just go ahead and introduce yourselves, that'd be great. And Uni, maybe you could. Oh, sorry.
I was gonna.
Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. My name is Beatriz Soto, and I am representing disproportionately impacted communities in CD3, and I am part of the data analysis subcommittee.
Hi, I'm Uni Blake. I am a senior policy advisor at the American Petroleum Institute. I'm on this task force as the public health / toxicologist expert, but I also work for the oil and gas industry, so I wear many different hats. And yeah, and my interest is obviously environmental justice and public health is on my portfolio here at API.
Awesome, thanks, Uni and Beatriz. And it looks like we have Brian from CDOT who's stepping in for Marcia, and we also have Jamie Valdez with Mothers Out Front from Pueblo on our call today too. So we have some additional representation from our task force members. Great, so I wanted to just do a very quick recap of the last meeting that we had. We haven't met in a couple of months. And just as a refresher, at our last meeting, we did hear pretty extensively from Dr. Katie Dickinson from the Colorado School of Public Health on lessons learned from what they called the Gratitude Project. They basically were focusing on pollution in North Denver. And kind of she walked through thinking about how to talk about environmental justice, from focusing on damages and harms to thinking about relationships between communities. She talked about the methodology that the Colorado School of Public Health used, and they did a project together with Green Latinos. And that report can be found online. It's hyperlinked on our public drive as well. We then jumped into a conversation to review and discuss what was the first draft of the recommendations. We talked about imperfect data and the advantages and disadvantages of using data that might not be QA/QC'd. We talked about cost and benefits. So like communities who suffer burdens versus benefits to those communities. We discussed data modernization as well as data collection. So to give you all a sense of where we are at now, the last time we met in June, we were talking about what was gearing up for the draft 1 recommendations. We completed draft 1 at the end of June. We sent that out for a 30-day public comment period. We received 236 public comments, either through the form of surveys or through written responses. And we've incorporated all of those comments into what will now be called draft 2. Draft 2 will be emailed out to the full task force tomorrow, probably late tomorrow, in the form of a board packet. So there'll be kind of all the materials that you need to review there prior to the meeting coming up next week. For the purposes of today's meeting, we're just going to focus on data, the data section, and I will drop a link to the agenda in the chat in just a moment. But in that agenda, you will see the draft recommendations hyperlinked. And that's kind of, feel free to look through that document. We'll be doing a screen share, but if you want to scroll through it at your own pace or kind of jump around, feel free to do that. Before we jump right into talking specifically about this subcommittee, and this might be some repetitive information for people that were in the equity meeting on Tuesday. But as you all know, in an effort to kind of facilitate really robust community engagement, especially among those that have been a little bit less engaged on the Western Slope, we decided to tack on a public comment session the evening before our meeting. So there will be a public comment session on Wednesday, August 24th from 5 to 7. And then we will have our full meeting on Thursday, August 25th. That meeting itself on the 25th will take place from 9 to 6:30 with the public comment session dedicated from 5:30 to 6:30. We do ask that you keep yourselves available at least until 7 p.m. Just because public comment could run over a little bit. Also, for those attending in person, and Uni and Beatriz, thanks for getting back to me. And Jamie, I know that you're trying to make an effort to attend in person. Brian, I need to touch base with you, or just send me a chat or a direct message if you'd like to let me know if you plan to attend in person. We're trying to get a final head count as Morgan is finalizing catering by the end of the week. So one thing to note on that is for the meeting on Thursday, the 25th, we do expect all task force members who are attending in person to arrive by 8:15 a.m. The meeting doesn't start till 9, but we're serving breakfast, and you'll have an opportunity to at least talk with each other, see each other in the flesh. There haven't really been that many opportunities for that, and so I would just build in that buffer to kind of have some time to socialize before we get into a very packed agenda. So any questions there before we jump into the data recommendations? And Jamie, I just saw your question in the chat. So the public comment session on the 24th will be taking place in person, but both of the meetings for the 24th and 25th, they're hybrid meetings. So if people cannot attend in person, they can click on the Zoom link and attend virtually. We will have Spanish interpretation for both of those meetings. And yeah, so, and I know that a lot of people had already kind of booked their travel so that they might be traveling in on the 24th. If you can't make it physically, if you're planning to attend in person on the 25th, but can't make it to the public comment session on the 24th, that is fine. Just, you know, make your best effort to attend that session virtually. And Jamie, I saw your hand was raised, so I hope I answered your question, but let me know if there's anything else. And Uni.
I'm curious regarding the comments that you received 200 and something comments. Did you have a time, were you able to analyze them? Because I'm curious to know who commented. I mean, was the engagement we talk about as a part of the task force, was it effective? Did we get the community members in the environmental justice communities? I mean, I'm just curious, you know, if you were able to analyze the comments so that we can do a better job maybe next time.
Do you want me to answer that, Lubna?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So we didn't necessarily track demographics among who responded. So if you look in the public drive, in the public comment folder, you can see that there were essentially two ways to provide responses. So I'll just put a, oops, I clicked the wrong thing. I'll put a link in the chat to that public comment folder. So you can see, sorry, taking me a second to navigate there. Okay, so here's the link to the folder. There were folks who did submit written comments via email. And so they might have provided a little more information about themselves, but that was kind of a range of local governments, individuals, nonprofit organizations, trade associations, and then also folks filled out a survey. So if you look in the survey results subfolder there, you can see that you can either see the complete results of the survey, where we did ask folks to identify what county they lived in, but we didn't collect additional demographic information. And then we also aggregated the results of the survey to each question and kind of summarized the responses. So we didn't really structure the survey to collect much demographic information, which is a long way of saying that the majority of the comments we received, 203 out of the 230 some, were from the survey. So we could potentially investigate including more demographic information beyond county of residence in a future attempt to get public feedback. One thing I would note is, you know, not sometimes and not always a proxy for kind of seeing who lives in a disproportionately impacted community is our language justice efforts. And you know, we did obviously make everything available in Spanish, but we did not get any written comments submitted in Spanish or survey responses in Spanish. All the survey responses were in English. And so something we're thinking about is how we can like make sure the public comment period is just as long for Spanish speakers next time around, and kind of do some affirmative outreach to Spanish speaking communities, like maybe setting up something like a cafecito, because we know that last time folks who spoke Spanish didn't have as long to read the Spanish draft. It took a couple, I think 2 weeks for us to get the full recommendations translated and posted. So we want to make sure that we have that sort of equitable comment period next time. So we are contemplating extending the comment period longer for Spanish speakers, just kind of based on the day the translation is ready, rather than the same day that the English version is ready.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel, for that overview. Beatriz?
Yeah, I have a question. So as a commissioner representing disproportionately impacted communities in CD3 and in kind of my rural community, I've been asking community members to hopefully come to the Grand Junction event and please participate and give testimony. A lot of what was mentioned from just like me listening from community is the fact that in rural communities, everything is so far away, and just the distances that communities have to travel to work or have to, it's a burden on their life already as it exists to participate in schools and other forms of, I don't know, like civic engagement or democracy in general. And I just took down a whole bunch of notes, Joel, of like their feedback Is that something helpful that I can provide you all too, and just like send it over? Because I don't know if people are actually going to make it, but we did have a really robust conversation. Just trying to, get some of that information and again, as a commissioner, just be engaged with my community and try to represent them more accurately.
Yeah, please send it to me and Lubna and Morgan and actually Rebecca B. Hill, our new community engagement specialist as well. We'd really love to see that and kind of use it in our own outreach efforts to better inform. So thank you so much, Beatriz. We really appreciate that. And I'll put Rebecca's email in the chat. There are 2 Rebecca B. Hills who work for state government, so she has a unique email address.
Awesome, thank you. Welcome, Michael. I saw you join the call. Glad to have more task force representation in the data subcommittee. So thanks for joining. I'm gonna just drop the link to the data recommendations that we will be reviewing. Again, we will do a screen share shortly and then start to, and if you would like to look at the document on your own, feel free to do that as well. So as I mentioned, one of the main things that we're focusing on today is the data recommendations in particular. And what we've tried to do over the past few weeks is really converting from the original bullet point format that draft 1 recommendations were in into more of a narrative format. Just keep in mind as we're going into these recommendations, there is still a lot of room for changes. The recommendations that have been formulated, as you all know, come from the task force. They've come from several subcommittee meetings and some of the larger meetings. And so in terms of kind of building consensus around some core ideas, that's something that we are still really working hard towards. And so don't by any means feel like, oh, this is already on paper, this is set in stone, or if there are gaps that you see, we do want to flag those and then have a really productive conversation and like filling those gaps in writing, having like very, very concise recommendations. I will say that like brand new ideas, it might be harder to incorporate because we don't have that much time until October. Our final meeting is going to be in October, and then our recommendations are due in November. We are already in mid-August, so time is flying. So we really want to focus on the recommendations that are there and like see if we can flesh those out in more detail. I will say that a lot of the commenters suggested that the task force do provide like very specific detail on the recommendations that are already there. And so that's what we're hoping to do at the August meeting and like maybe facilitate some straw polls and things like that. One thing that we did in order to get us to a little bit more of like a refined recommendation document is that we moved some ideas to what is called a bike rack. And so these are ideas that were maybe like briefly raised by 1 or 2 task force members really early on in the discussions, but then didn't really have much traction. People didn't really talk about them again. And so you all will have access to the bike rack document. And I'll drop that in the chat right now, just so you all can kind of see what that is. But that's going to be part of the board packet that I sent out on Friday, is that if there's anything in that bike rack document that you all want to bring back over to the larger recommendations document, that is still a possibility. It's just from a like filtering standpoint, we needed to take some content out to like not have the document continue to grow and grow and grow. The document is a little bit longer, but that's because we've detailed some of the recommendations that are already there. So like we just kind of expanded on a fewer number of recommendations. I will just remind us for the agenda document that I linked in the chat earlier, it does focus on, and I just kind of want to do a refresher here of what those objectives are of this subcommittee. Those objectives directly relate to what is required of us in the statute. So we've talked about addressing the lack of data and data sharing between state agencies, making recommendations about how to improve research and data collection efforts, and then developing recommendations for establishing measurable goals for eliminating environmental health disparities for DI communities. So that is essentially paraphrase language coming directly from the statute, and those objectives are still very much relevant. To that last point of establishing measurable goals, Uni, I saw that you flagged that that is something that we still need to really discuss with this subcommittee. And so I hope that we can dedicate some time to doing just that. All right, and then in terms of the recommendations themselves, the first couple of pages are kind of introductory language to help you all understand about the document, and then really get us focused on what we need to be mindful of when we're reviewing. So clarity, prioritization, how we're going to integrate these recommendations, what type of flexibility or variability there is. And so you all can kind of look at those first couple of pages as a guidance. But the recommendations do really start at the end of page 2. And for the purposes of this conversation, I think one of the sections that we really need to flesh out is that section 1 on participatory science, or what we've previously called citizen science, community-based participatory research. We've kind of rebranded to be as inclusive and just to the point as possible. We've rebranded that as participatory science. And there are kind of 3 major questions that, especially based off of public commenters, questions that were raised, that I think it would be helpful for us to talk about today and dive right into. So I will start to do a screen share. Give me just a moment here.
So now, while you're doing that, I think the draft of the bike rack you shared is our internal draft that we're still working on. So just for today's meeting, I'm going to make a copy of that document and put it in the public folder, but we are scrambling to get everything ready for you all tomorrow. So there may be a couple changes to that document still for tomorrow. So just bear that in mind, but I'll make a public facing copy in our public drive and then share that out again.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. And I definitely knew that and just didn't think about that when I was putting it in the chat. Okay, so let's see. There we go. Okay, can you all see my screen okay? Okay, thanks. So as I mentioned, we're going to just scroll down to page 2. This was most recently updated as of this morning. So these are the recommendations as up to date as possible. And so let's start here in this participatory science section. And I will increase the size of this. So as I mentioned, a lot of public commenters raised several important questions that this task force should consider during the August meeting, but that we can kind of discuss and maybe get to a closer conclusion here. And these are the 3 questions that we highlighted. And starting off with, how can agencies set standards and provide training and resources to oversee participatory science projects to ensure that they follow appropriate and rigorous standards? Our second question is, who and which agencies should manage allocating funding to participatory science projects? And then lastly, will disproportionately impacted communities be prioritized in funding allocations? And if so, how specifically should this be accomplished? And so I want to just pose all 3 of those questions. We'll go through them one by one. I can pause for a minute to give people a chance to read through this section on your own. And feel free to raise your hand or come off mute as we talk about this.
Lubna, is it okay if I interject one more thing there? which is just that this was one of the many questions that we did bring to the public on the survey that we administered. So we kind of had a question on the survey about, we were still using community science, but got a lot of feedback of no one knew what that meant. So that's part of why we changed to participatory science. We got really robust and amazing public feedback on this question from a lot of commenters and a lot of folks who filled out the survey. So I did just want to make sure, the task force members know not all these ideas are your ideas, because we really did try to bring in the best ideas that we saw in the public comment that were really aligned with some of the discussions you all had into this draft. So if you see something you're like, I never talked about that, like it is something that we brought in from the public comment that we saw in the feedback, and you can see kind of the summary of responses to that question in that document I shared earlier.
Awesome, thanks, Joel. I picked a not convenient snack to eat during this call, which is an orange full of seeds. So, but I'm now done, so I will not be going off camera anymore. Joel, do you prefer to screen share so you can help line edit? I wasn't sure if that would be easier since I have quite a few screens.
Yeah, why don't you let me do that, Lumna? That sounds good.
Okay, thanks. Great. So as we're getting that back up on the screen, the question that we're focusing on is, how can agencies set standards and provide training and resources to oversee participatory science projects in a way that ensures that they follow appropriate and rigorous standards? And I'm happy to provide more like context there in terms of like why we care about that, but we've had several conversations about why having those appropriate and rigorous standards matter. So let's pick up the conversation there. We've kind of established that being a challenge. So we're talking about how can those standards be set, and what kind of training and resources should we be suggesting?
I have a question for this. Could there be, or suggestion, could it be like you have to partner with, an agency or a university, or like there's a menu of options for people to meet that criteria based on their location and or maybe like certified or authorized like different institutions that we know will be recognized? Is that like something that would help?
Yeah, I think so. And that's something that we can kind of discuss here as a group to see if that feels like a viable option of like kind of setting criteria for participatory science. Other thoughts on Beatrice's idea? And also, just as a side note, we are taking, Morgan is taking very detailed notes on this conversation in our notes document. So Joel is kind of doing like high level summaries of ideas that we want to incorporate directly into this recommendations doc. So if every word of what you're saying is not incorporated, that's why. But if any like thoughts or ideas are not summarized correctly, just feel free to go into the document yourself and edit, or just come off mute and let us know how to correct that.
Can I add that it would have to be like a neutral entity? So not, for example, I don't know, like partnering with a business that it's their interests to have that facility or a permit or something. I think that would be really important as well.
Could you maybe flesh out what you mean by like a neutral entity? So would like a university be a neutral entity? That there are like, I guess I don't know what to call them, but like sort of standard setting organizations who like set sort of certain standards for like scientific research, which are like potentially, I think in some cases, for-profit entities, but not like a specific business. So do you have kind of like an idea on like what would qualify under that?
I mean, like for example, I'm thinking I don't know, let's say there's a recycling facility that wants to go into a certain neighborhood, like the example that we saw from Chicago. If like they're the ones paying for this or they're the ones necessarily conducting the study, does that give them neutrality when they have like an end goal or a business purpose for this? That's just like one example that where I'm thinking, you know, it can, how do you keep that neutrality? And Uni, you're probably a lot more of an expert on this as well, but let's say for example you do find findings that might be contradictory to your business interest. is that is that going to be, you know, would you sway the data or, you know, push it in a certain direction? That's what I'm thinking. um,
Like minimizing conflict of interest, maybe.
I think, I mean, I would take a step back and say there needs to be, I would recommend that the state or some agency develop some kind of guidance document around what it really means when you're talking about community-based research. And another thing that comes to mind when we talk about these community-based programs is there has to be a central body where all the research projects or the programs are kind of stored so that we avoid research fatigue, which we're finding is a really, really big issue. So you don't have like 6 or 7, 8 research projects going on in one community at the same time. You know, there have to be a central governing body. And so the way I see this is if the state develops, you know, with public input, some kind of guardrail or some kind of guidance document. And then from that, you can incorporate all these different things that are of concern. Talking about, you know, who, how, what, you know, the specific detail. And I understand Beatrice's, you know, concern about, you know, various industries coming in and doing, you know, trying to do research that supports whatever it is they're doing. If we do have some kind of governing body or something that oversees these projects, then I'm thinking like an IRB. Okay, IRB universities use them, you know, to make sure that your research project does not impact the participants. So I think there has to be somebody in between who reviews the projects and the goals and the objectives, just to make sure that the concerns that, you know, Beatrice is bringing up do not occur. You know, if you make a research plan and these are your objectives, then you need to report on them as transparently as possible. You know.
Uni, I want to follow up on that point, and I wonder if, you know, I was asking Beatrice the question because I think determining something like neutrality is a really tough line drawing exercise, right? Because if we're thinking about general research projects, like how do you know, you know, whether a private entity is going to benefit? Like perhaps a consultant could be a really good fit to like do research with a community group, but then 10 years later they take a client that seeks a permit in the area, right? Like, so I wonder if like, so that's why I was kind of trying to probe that line drawing. So I wonder if like, if maybe to Uni's point, instead of like designating a list of agencies and trying to probe the neutrality, if that type of like a state agency should essentially set up some sort of IRB structure to like review, so that there's that sort of guaranteed neutrality, if that might be a little like simpler of a process instead of trying to like figure out that type of like what is and isn't neutral. So it kind of maybe put that question back to Beatrice, is what you think about like a sort of that structure instead.
I mean, I liked Brian's comment about minimizing potential conflict of interest.
I mean, I think that's very, very, you start to limit, you know, if you believe that industry is the only one with a with potential conflict of interest. And industry sitting here thinking that some of the NGOs have there's a conflict of interest. And so that's why I'm thinking when you're looking at just the project itself, you judge it based on what the project or the objective of the project is, and not so much who is paying or who's bringing it in. So you have this entity in the middle that makes that decision, that's able to look at it and say, yeah, your project goals are just self-serving in that case, or if it is a really true community-based project and you have the community there, who are providing that input to determine whether it's a project that they see is worthwhile for them. When I mean a project, I'm talking about like the research itself. I'm not talking about like the facility, but just the research question itself. If you're engaging the community to come up with a research question and you're planning the research with the community, and whatever's the outcome, it's something that everybody agrees on. So when you're focused on the project itself, I think it takes away some of the bias that may come in by whoever's funding the project. Maybe I'm just being a little bit too optimistic.
Uni, I actually had a similar thought to one of your points, which is just that we have one maybe really good example of a participatory science project we're all aware of, which is the research done by Cultivando under the Suncor SEP. And in that case, the entity that was sort of coming up with should they get the funding was a community-based process that included lots of community members in Commerce City to kind of figure out what should be awarded funding. The conflict of interest requirements for that process ended up excluding community members who were on that selection committee from then like benefiting or participating in the research in any way, right? Even down to like getting gift cards from participating in aspects. So I think when I heard conflict of interest, I just got a little scared because of all the discussions we've had about how we can make our SEP programs better, that there are definitely conflicts of interest with like a regulated entity that could sort of, I guess, like, benefit from the outcome of research, right? If it's, say, to determine a baseline standard that would be used to like set up a regulation or a permit, but then there are also like conversely like community members whose like financial conflicts of interest could come into play later if they're somehow considered a beneficiary of the research. Or so that's just worth thinking about. Is that's I think a challenge we are grappling with in the conflict of interest space. And maybe just, go ahead, Brian.
Well, yeah, I'm not a part of this committee, but I'm just thinking about how CDOT would use this, thinking about what is the audience of this, and then when CDOT's deciding between two different areas they're going to put roads or intersections or something, any information is good information. It doesn't have to be high quality data, quote unquote. It's still from the community, and maybe if there is data that wouldn't be publishable in a peer-reviewed journal, it's still really valuable. So encouraging state agencies to accept all data, right? Even if it has some biases, incorporating that into the community narrative, I think is useful, is beneficial. So, if it's third graders going out there and collecting air quality data, that's great, and that's really important to how we make decisions. So it might be good to lessen the burden for what is considered, official data or official participatory science.
Ooh, I feel that so much. Thank you for saying that too, Brian, because that's a key thing for qualitative data. For specifically, if we went by data, most people don't even know to ask about who the indigenous communities are in the space because they don't think they exist. So it's recognizing sometimes data is already automatically going to have certain forms of projection and bias. And how are we going to fill in those gaps by asking community to recognize that as well? And how can they help in that space? And most of all, listening to the data once we get it. It's kind of a big deal, especially where we live for particulate pollutants, is that we don't have any data with teeth. So we never have enforceable protections with teeth either. We need, once we've compiled that data, there's a baseline, there's a qualitative picture, teaching context, that needs to actually have some value once that all gets together too. That's been an issue for us. And I know Cultivando, they did also specifically highlight how even though they did have that grant from Suncor, it's been a really difficult process to get a lot of the funding and then how to allocate it in a way that they saw for community monitoring, which it might be helpful to bring in Olga to talk about just the challenges that they've had about that specifically.
Thanks, Renee, to that last one. We've been trying. So as you remember, Olga came to the April meeting and talked to you all about the SEP process. Yeah, and then we did hold a focus group in Commerce City last Thursday that was kind of solely focused on that SEP process. We tried really hard to get representatives from the SEP recipient groups there, but unfortunately, no one from Cultivando was able to make it. So we've sort of tried to follow up for a one-on-one with at least Araceli about those questions to bring that information back to the task force, but haven't heard back yet, I believe, unless Lubna can correct me if I'm wrong. But it is definitely something we're trying to get that information to you, since we didn't get everyone we would have hoped for that focus group conversation last week. What I did want to do is actually kind of force everyone to get back to line editing this document. So there is a whole section of the data recommendations on data quality. This was a section that we didn't feel like there was like enough detail from the subcommittee to like put it in a narrative form like we had in some other sections of the document, but it's definitely something you all have talked about a lot, so we didn't think it was something that needed to be moved to the bike rack. So I wonder, and since we kind of shifted into that, what do we do about data of varying quality question with Brian, if we could try to work on some like line edits or additions or fleshing out this section of the recommendation. So since that is definitely something that you all need to do. So Brian, do you have kind of like, what would you be up for if I kind of just move what you said above down to here in terms of, agencies should sort of consider using data of varying quality if it's gathered through participatory means?
I'm open to that, yeah.
And as Joel is doing that, I'm curious to hear from other task force members on whether there's consensus around this, just within this group. And if there's any kind of red flags here that anybody wants to, or yellow flags that people want to like just discuss while we're in this section.
I guess the sharing of data across state and federal agencies, I can only use other examples like missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, things like that, that if there's already data there, being able that they communicate within each other so it doesn't re-traumatize certain communities, or we don't have to continually take the same data, re-traumatizing the same communities.
Yeah, thanks for that, Renee. Joel has kind of scrolled up to that section of the recommendations where we do include information about data sharing, and that's something that's been emphasized over and over again, not just in this subcommittee, but in several of the other ones about data sharing and its importance, and maximizing the utility of an existing data set instead of reinventing the wheel. So thanks for that. Again, folks have this document. You all have edit access and can also scroll through it at your own pace. I will just drop it again in the chat, but feel free to make suggested edits or make comments if you come off mute on any of these sections. We we're just talking about addressing data quality, and we're now talking about data sharing. So any further feedback on those would be appreciated.
Yeah, I just caught D under addressing data quality. I think we need to talk a little bit more about that one. You know, structures and solutions to fill data gaps should not unduly inhibit state agencies' ability to reduce pollution based on uncertainty regarding the impacts of that pollution. I think it's something you'll get a lot of pushback from the regulated community. If you're going to make a regulatory decision based on incomplete information, unless I'm misreading that bullet, that D.
Uni, I'm so sorry. I don't know if it's my computer or my internet connection or yours, but I missed part of what you said. So could you kind of say it again?
I'm looking at addressing data quality in that document. Structures and solutions to fill data gaps should not unduly inhibit state agencies' ability to reduce pollution based on uncertainties. I think you may get pushback from the regulated community on that one. Specifically, you know, if you're asking for something around, you know, reduction of some emissions or something like that, but the data you have is incomplete, you know, I'm not sure what we were trying to, that statement is trying to say.
Yeah, so Uni, do you feel like that should be removed? Do you feel like it should be edited? What's your recommendation there?
I think, you know, we can edit it, you know. I think the approach that we were trying to have was this greening kind of approach. For example, if there are data gaps, I would, as a regulated entity, I would like an opportunity to see if I can fill those data gaps before a decision is made. You know, before there's an ask for me to spend money to reduce pollution or to change a process. So maybe there needs to be a step between identifying that you have a gap and then an opportunity to fill that gap like as quickly as possible, so that we're not dragging out a situation that might be impactful for community, but there still has to be an opportunity for the regulated community to fill that gap, to identify an alternative data source or something, instead of just going straight from, okay, we have these data gaps, but, you know, there's this general understanding that, you know, we have a problem, and so let's just act. There has to be a step in between. So I'm not sure how you would capture that.
I'm gonna try to write something out that I think captures what I hear you say, but I might not get it right. So you and the other task force members should just weigh in and see how I do. Does that sound good?
I wonder if it would benefit. So I'm kind of feeling like D and E in this section are slightly contradictory. You know, where we are saying that there's, you know, one recommendation that all data, regardless of the quality, should be used. And Uni, and please correct me if I'm like hearing incorrectly, but, you know, by saying like, well, if there are data gaps, those should be addressed first before we move forward. And so I feel like, you know, I'm trying to like kind of create like a through line there where we like can mesh those like recommendations together or ensure that they are like, you know, in sync.
So, I mean, they are, I mean, I'm not saying that the data cannot be used. The data can be used to, like we suggested, a tiered approach. So if the data quality is not good or you're missing data, then you can use that as a screening data to trigger some further review or some more monitoring. I think we captured that under C. But then the next one is saying that even if there's data gaps, you can just go ahead, but it's not lining up with C. But E is lining up with C. So, the state can consider that data, even if it doesn't meet the quality, you can use it for screening. And then you can make a decision based on that information to either, whatever it triggers, further review or robust monitoring or, but the way the D is written, it's almost like there has to be an action, like to reduce the pollution. C kind of gives you that option to, okay, there's a concern, we're missing data. Let's do like a screening look. Okay, we have some concerns, so let's trigger it to go do something else. Let's go get more data, let's go do this. But maybe it's time sensitive. Maybe that's something we need to note in there because that's the biggest concern. You don't want to be caught in these loops where you're trying to collect data and the data will never reach the quality that's needed to make a decision. Because that's typically how, we work with risk management when you're managing a risk.
Yeah, thanks for that further clarification. That's really helpful.
Yeah, and like specific edits or rewording would be helpful. And Uni, I'm almost certain that my computer is going really slow, so I'm having trouble calling it up. But this specific recommendation in D was one that you all didn't come up with. It was one of the ones that came from a suggestion in public comment, and just triple checking which comment it came from. Sorry, one moment. Okay, I'm not remembering whose comment it was, sorry, but it was one of the comments we got, I think actually from one of the state agencies that provided feedback on the draft, though please don't quote me on that, and maybe we read a lot of comments, so could have been the survey or another commenter. But I think the idea was maybe that, to your point about risk management, there often is a lot of uncertainty about health impacts, and sometimes the sort of proving a health impact can be obviously a challenge, right? You're a toxicologist, so I don't have to tell you that. So sometimes there can be enough data to suggest that there could be an issue, but the sort of health impacts are uncertain still. So I wonder if we added the word health impacts there, if that would sort of help, sort of frame what I think this commenter was getting at and what led us to build it into the draft for you all to review, of just sort of, when we're facing uncertainty, given how complex toxicology is, that would be like, an area where sometimes agencies can act, or at least, this is almost like a negative, right? That if we're so focused on filling every data gap, sometimes the agencies will need to take actions. So, I mean, does adding the word health there help? Like what else could we do here to kind of address the concern you're raising?
I think it makes it worse. No, I gotta think about it, because it's one of those areas where I know like the body, I know exactly what the person was trying to say when you added the word health impact in there. Is the existing body of literature that kind of that kind of supports that there are health impacts due to proximity to a certain structure or something like that. But even from a scientific data perspective, it's enough to have you go take a second look, not necessarily enough for you to ask for pollution reduction measures when there's uncertainty. I have to just think about how to phrase it. I'm not trying to dismiss it. I just have to think of a better way to say it, that it's more palatable to the regulated community.
Okay, thanks. Oh, go ahead, Lubna.
No, thanks. I see Renee and Brian's hands are up. If you have a maybe a direct comment or response to what Uni is discussing, if whoever has a comment or response to that wants to go first, and then if somebody's going to change the topic, then maybe that person could go second. But if you both are, if it's related, go ahead in the order.
I think mine's related. Honestly, maybe highlighting data equity, being able to give state and federal agencies a chance to fill their data gaps in a timely way that will highlight where they didn't have it already for community, but still encompassing communities' data as well. Because it might not pertain to that state and federal agency, but it'll still provide a context that that state and federal agency didn't have. So it's recognizing that, again, the status quo sometimes just by methodology sometimes leaves out these communities, and absorbing as much data and saturation as possible does provide context no matter where it comes from sometimes, because we're not going to get all the data to make specific decisions on things. So maybe something about data equity involving community with that context, and then why giving state and federal agencies, a chance to fill that data gap.
Renee, I think that's a great idea. Can you help me figure out where we should like sort of incorporate that feedback into the recommendations?
When we were talking about D&E, talking about how to fill the data gaps, giving state and federal agencies a chance to also to in a timely way also do their own and work within community that way. But then data quality may not be important to state and federal agencies, and mentioning something within those two that highlight it's equitable to have state and federal agencies fill their data gaps and understand their context of where they're missing that, but it's also equitable to continue to involve other forms of data, whether it pertains to their state and federal agency directly or not, because it still gives certain forms of context as in I don't know how to say that, as in a bigger pool of data saturation, something like that. I would say data equity highlighted those specifically. I don't know how to say that, love. I'm thinking. I hope that made sense though. Because I want to make sure that state and federal agencies do have a chance to provide more cultural context, or just context, trauma context, any context about pollution, to understand that type of equity, but also that different forms of data that might not necessarily pertain to them can still be involved with certain aspects that data does include.
Thanks, Renee. Is the way that's phrased, does that feel like that captures what you were saying pretty well in D2?
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you, Joel.
Brian?
Yeah, I think I'm looking at, all the different resources that CDOT looks at when we make decisions, and it's a lot, and it's not just air quality. It's things like wetlands and farmlands, and there's 25 different resources, and they all have their unique regulators, and they all have their idea and their definition of what is quality data. What is the threshold for data that can be used in a farmlands analysis? So I think it would be a big lift for this document to speak to all of those different uses of data. And like Renee was saying, a lot of that data is just used to develop an understanding of the community, be that pollution or be that, I guess I used farmlands, right? Like, one of the questions on a farmlands analysis is this land being used for farming? And that can be pretty subjective, like you go out and you look and it doesn't look like it, but that's because it's a cover crop that year. And it's fallow, but it is a productive land. So a long way to say that I think it would be really, really difficult and very impressive if this follows all of the definitions of data rigor. And so, maybe making it resource specific, that each resource will decide what is rigorous enough, and input should be welcomed in any form that it is gathered in or given.
I muted you instead of unmuting myself. Sorry, Brian. But so I'm going to come back. I think you're kind of coming back to the answer to this question here. And so I'm going to, which I think I want to just kind of move this down. I want to make sure we sort of track this. And so I think what you're saying, these were kind of variations on a theme here. So but let me, okay. I am messing up the document. This is a problem with live editing. Sorry, everyone. I'm not trying to put Brian's comment first. That was just for the bullet points one. But so Brian, I think you're trying to say that given the wide range of contexts that agencies use data about different types of resources, the appropriate standard for the rigor and processes of gathering data through participatory science projects should be set differently by different agencies depending on the context of how the agency will use data about that specific topic. Is that a good summary of what you're saying, kind of getting at that part of the participatory science question?
Yeah, and I think it was just an overall, you know, if we're specific enough to talk about like air pollution, then that won't be relevant for other disciplines.
Okay, thanks, Brian. I see Renee's hand is still up, and Renee, did you have more to add, or was it just didn't put it down yet?
Sorry.
No worries. Oh, Lubna, are you going to get us back on track to kind of talk through these questions here?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of check in around this first question about how we can get agencies to set standards and provide training and resources to oversee the participatory science projects. And I wanted to see if, you know, the comments that were made here, if we feel like that's robust and has gotten us to a place that we really feel like we could answer this question.
I have a concern about the last point, Joel. If it's used by different agencies on specific topics, how are agencies like the next agency that's going to go do something in the same community use that same information? If it's not related or it's a different context, right? Because, and I think that's how traditionally all our agencies have been working, that they're all so specific that they don't speak to each other. And that's where we get cumulative impacts on certain communities. Anyway, that's just my concern, that is kind of like keeping the status quo as it is, and we're trying to move away from it and beyond it.
Maybe we could change, because I think my statement above was not necessarily agencies are specific, but research disciplines are specific, right? So CDOT air quality can talk to CDPHE air quality, but CDOT air quality has a hard time talking to CDOT farmlands. So it's more the disciplines rather than the agencies. If that distinction makes sense.
So Brian, I made that change. I'm not sure if that like addresses Beatrice's question as much, because there's, and maybe I wasn't getting your point right, but yeah, I think there's still this sort of, the question is really like, who should be like, I mean, it's how should agencies set standards and provide training and resources? So like, do you think there should be like one body that is doing that across agencies, but that is just sort of setting different standards according to like the media that is being researched, or do you think that different agencies should set different standards?
Was that directed at Beatrice or me? Oh, Beatrice. Oh. Sorry.
I think there should be a standard that all agencies will accept. Because let's say, for example, you know, Brian was giving an example. It's like, oh yeah, we'll take from third graders. That's fine, right? But will the Water Commission do the same thing and the Air Commission do the same thing? You know what I mean? It's like maybe there might be certain agencies that are more willing to, but I think it has to be across the board, right? And there has to be consensus. Otherwise, you know, there's going to be so many alternate paths. and again, they're all going to be different. And that's where it gets so complicated for community to participate, because it's like, oh, now I need to learn the rules of each agency. And that it's too much, especially with communities that are, you know, facing land pollution, air pollution, transportation pollution, water pollution, and it's all in their district or in their area. And again, it just perpetuates harm, right, to those same communities.
Thanks, Beatrice. I think I tried to capture that, but then, or Lumna, you should jump in. I'm not doing a good job of editing and getting the conversation going. So go ahead.
I just saw Sheila and Uni's hands go up as Beatrice was talking, so I feel like there might be some further ideas or ways to flesh this out with our subcommittee members. So yeah, if you all have thoughts there.
Uni, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, your hand was up before mine though. But
okay, all right. So you may have discussed this, and I apologize for jumping in late. You know, there are, I don't know, a million ways to define participatory science. And so there will need to be a standard, a standard across agencies for what is considered a rigorous standard. And then there, you know, back to the issue of discipline, environmental atmospheric chemistry, participatory science is going to look very different from, I don't know, infectious disease, participatory science, or although infectious disease is not really an issue in environmental justice, but I don't know, chronic disease, I could say, participatory research. And so there will need to be standards within each discipline as well.
Thanks, Sheila, for that. I feel like you're always good at helping us kind of zoom out and think about just the fundamentals of this question. Uni, did you have something that you wanted to add on?
Yeah. I don't know if you moved away from that particular thought about each agency having its own way of doing it. So I think for me, when I think about data and data quality, it's just a concept. So what I mean by that is it depends on how you intend to use the data, and that's how you make a decision on what kind of quality you want. And so how much confidence you need in the data. So that goes to my thing about uncertainty. If you don't have confidence in your data and you have all this uncertainty, but you want to make a decision that's very, very impactful, resource-wise, then I don't think that's a good decision to make. That's what I'm saying. The way that's written, that, you know, doesn't matter with the uncertainty of the data you have, you should be able to act on it. But again, it depends on what the action is. If your action is to go to a facility and have them redesign the emission system based on uncertainty, then that's not a good use of, I mean, there's a mismatch there. So I think what I would put in there somehow, as we talk about data quality, we need to understand it's just a concept and it's just how you intend to use the data. Now, if the state wants to take time to kind of put some, definitions around the needs and the uses, yeah, we can recommend the state develops like a data quality guidance document. The EPA does have one. It's almost 200 pages long, just for your information. So it's a topic that's been really beaten into the ground. So I think at this level, just saying, data quality it just depends on the intended use. And so if a third grader's data is useful for a community deciding whether they want to do future research, it makes sense. But the third grader's data should not be used to make a regulatory decision. That's, yeah. I think what we can capture in our recommendations are just those like really high level concepts about data quality, and then just turn around and ask maybe the state or whoever to take a stab at putting some kind of guidance together, or just linking it to the EPA guidance. Let me see if I can find it, and I can just share a link to that. And it has all that information in there.
So then how would an agency know I can trust this data, but I can't trust that data for this particular decision that I'm making?
Shouldn't we see the layering or intersectional instead of exclusion of data though? I guess what I'm saying is I don't see a lot of intersections of how data can kind of also just sometimes provide context, even if it doesn't always relate to the state and federal agency. It still gives them a form of a knowledge base or a baseline that can provide some form of guidance on their decisions.
Exactly. That's I think that's the point I'm trying to make. If you have a tiered approach, or if you understand the different levels of data quality, then you can make various decisions based on it. And so maybe it's another opportunity for training, for CDCT to train folks that use data. When you put together this entity or this IRB/group, there's a clear delineation of understanding what different projects are, what the data is going to be used for, even before the project was started. There's that clear understanding. When it comes to if we go back to the topic of community-based research. So
I do agree with this. And thank you, Uni, for bringing that too. Because then we can start going into intersections of data. And they might not always apply to that state and federal agency, but they should know what's going on.
Yes.
I want to slow us down for a sec. Sorry, we are so close to the end of this process, really, and I just want to make sure that we are understanding as your staff, like what you're saying and getting it into the right part of the document. So I think I added what I was hearing you all discuss kind of in this tiers section and tiered approach, but then I heard something about participatory science, which is sort of like a different subject. So just want to check, Renee, Uni, did we get this in the right section? Did we capture your idea correctly? This is why Morgan takes notes in addition to me redlining on the screen, but just want to make sure that we got that idea correctly, or that I'm not missing something, or that you weren't thinking about something different.
Yeah, I think it fits in both. If you're having a tiered, I mean, on one hand, we're talking about community-based research and them collecting research. And the criticism of that research has always been the quality of the research. And typically, I think Beatrice said in the beginning that that research, those findings or the data tend to be rejected because it's not vigorous enough, it's not this and that enough. And so if we follow like the standard protocol that has been vetted, when it comes to looking at data quality, then you can make decisions based on whatever research question you're asking or whatever the quality, wherever your data quality falls. So the two topics are coming together on this point in that we're not rejecting all community collected research, but it needs to be put in the context of how it's going to be used or who's going to use it. I hope I said that right.
I think that helped me understand. I added that example based on what you said. So thank you, Uni. And Uni, for some reason your audio quality I'm having some trouble with. Like sometimes it's fine and sometimes it isn't. So I don't know what the problem is, but sorry about that too if I'm not capturing everything you say.
Yeah. Thanks, Uni. And that maybe your headset will make a difference. I also just, in the spirit of, I know people care about name pronunciations, and I just want folks to know that Uni's name is pronounced Uni, not Uni. Uni kind of with a Y sound. So just so folks know.
I answer to all of it, so yeah, it doesn't matter, but thank you.
Yeah. Sheila?
So some might consider this radical, but I'm a little concerned. I kind of think I'm leaning in the direction of, you know, I would like to see all data and all studies in the area of environmental justice include a community component. I get a little nervous when there's this line of demarcation between community-based research or citizen science, and there's the other stuff, the science. I mean, I would really like to see a meeting in the middle. I think that, you know, all studies that are used to impact decisions in this area need to involve members of the community. And so I'm a little concerned when there's this distinction of, you know, participatory science versus, I don't know, what you want to call, you know, academic science, or I don't know.
So I'm seeing agreement on Sheila's point from Renee and Beatrice, and I wonder if anybody has kind of counter thoughts to this about the data needing to be distinctly different.
I don't think it is. I think whatever data quality, it goes for the academics as well. And you know, to Sheila's point, if a researcher wants to do research in a community, that's one of the reasons, you know, I was recommending there's like a central body that they need to, you know, go through there and say, this is research you want to do. And with a clear understanding that the community knows about it, the community, you know, is answering the questions the community wants answered. I think that's what you're trying to say. There has to be that link between the researchers and the community needs, you know, instead of this researchers just doing whatever it is that they typically do and not circling back to the community with responses or answers, or doing the research that really doesn't answer the community's question, you know, what's being asked. And so I don't want to be as radical as Sheila is and say, you know, that all research that is in environmental, you know, but I think it's a very well taken point that any research that's conducted in a community around environmental justice that involves the community has to go through this central place. and has to have community engagement as a part of it, because the board will have the community members in it as well. I would think, you know. Is that better? Can you hear me better with my headset on?
I can.
Okay.
I don't know about Joel. I like the model of the Navajo Nation. The Navajo Nation has their own IRB. And so if you want to do any kind of research involving the Navajo Nation, you have to go through their process, which is very, it's rigorous and it's very, I would say community-based, in that they honor and respect Indigenous ways of knowing. I think members of the Navajo Nation are involved in every phase of any research project. I mean, it's a model for me.
Any reactions to that?
It is that exactly. It's at the status quo that we're used to of data and methodology already has projections, erasure, and exclusion. And it's making sure that you have community involvement early on throughout the entire process to check and have a check and balance of that system. That's why the Navajo, the Nation does that. So I completely agree that there has to be a form of community-based cultural context, because if it wasn't already an issue, it would have reflected in the data already, and it doesn't.
Awesome, thank you. And thanks, Joel, for capturing that. And
thank you, Sheila, for bringing that up too.
Yeah, and for folks, if there's anything that we are like summarizing here that you want more specified, please do just come off mute and flag that.
I really liked that point, and I worry that as it's written now, the community involvement in the IRB review process, I think just early community involvement, you know, that notifying a community like, hey, we're starting this project, we're going to be looking at these topics, and some sort of community conversation there that's greater than captured in a formalized IRB process. Because I also worry that participatory science groups might feel like they're coming too late to the game, and if agencies are communicating early, then that.
Brian, sorry, I'm gonna challenge you. So where does this go, I guess, in the recommendations if it isn't part of the IRB section? Is it so that we're just leaving out or scrolling up, I guess, we're in the participatory science section. So are you saying that I guess where would it sort of fit if you're saying this isn't really like just the IRB? Community shouldn't just be involved early in the process for like the IRB that's gonna set standards for a participatory science project. Is there kind of like a different place you think it would go?
No, thanks for pushing back a little bit, Joel. And I just want to name that, I'm coming late and I'm not a voting member, and maybe we can just leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, to your point though, I think like, I'm not sure actually, now that I tried to write it down as a note, I'm not sure exactly what it means, because I do think, Renee, I think the point you were making was a little broader, right? Like it wasn't just, or was it this narrow that community should be involved in the IRB process for reviewing participatory science projects, or were you making like a broader point too? Because I want to like
a little bit of a broader one too, to even include funding or support for community integration or community data, and even educational opportunities for a community to get involved. Like that's part of the process, is community doesn't know that they can kind of be in this space in that way, and it's maintaining support for them, whether it's collecting community data, whether it's involvement or some type of incentive to keep community in the space.
Yeah, Sheila.
So I would like to see all EJ research follow some model of the Navajo Nation IRB process, is what I'm saying, or IRB model, because that guarantees that communities, impacted communities, will be involved in all phases of the research. It, as I said, honors Indigenous ways of knowing. I mean, it's just a good template for conducting environmental justice research, I think. I really worry about using status quo methods of doing this kind of research where you have, you know, R01 academic institutions, white guys, not to, you know, I'm not trying to pick on them, doing this research from their labs, and that's considered acceptable. That hasn't worked in the past, and so we can't follow that model, that white dominant culture model of conducting research. It's not working.
Sheila, it's really helpful to hear you articulate that. I flagged this as a comment, which means I think we need to pull this into like a separate recommendation. Like we're not really talking about participatory science anymore. So this is kind of a separate model. So that's helpful. And in the interest of saving everyone from seeing us live edit on the screen, Morgan, I'm sure will capture that in the notes if she hasn't already. And Lubna and I will work on kind of pulling that into a separate recommendation that isn't in this section sometime between now and this time tomorrow. So thank you for that clarity.
And I don't mean to disparage anyone. So.
Just to piggyback and clarify, that would include all DIC, because I think Beatriz also mentioned that too, under the definition. And then that also involves often throughout the entire process, a council. So some form of a committee of DIC that's going to be involved throughout the process because it has to be with them.
Awesome. Thanks for clarifying that. And I think that's going to be a really helpful section to kind of break out into its own as we refine these.
And I was just going to add real quick, everybody spoke my point, but I was going to add that kind of that cross cut with the folks that are doing the engagement piece. We're working on I think we have a subcommittee that's working on engagement, community engagement. This might be one of those bullet points that may be under there as well. When you're talking about, because this is about engaging the community early in the process of whatever it is you're doing, you know. And if you want to participate, if you're coming from the outside and wanting to do some research, you involve the community early in the process.
Awesome, thanks, Uni. Okay, in the interest of time, yeah, and Uni, I think we're still having a hard time hearing you a little bit. I noticed that sometimes when you lean forward, it is better. I don't really know how exactly to troubleshoot, but yeah, maybe whenever you're off mute, if you could possibly lean forward, and maybe that'll help. So in the interest of time, I think I do want to move us toward this second question of who, meaning like which agency or agencies should manage allocating funding to participatory science projects, and kind of dive into a discussion there.
Just to tee up that discussion, the reason we're posing these questions is these are questions that we saw in the comments. They were sort of common themes across a lot of commenters being like, you know, as you know, a lot of the recommendations just said agencies before, right? So, you know, we sort of interpreted that most of what we've been talking about so far was focused on CDPHEs. So we've kind of built that in here, but we really do want to pose like, who are we envisioning kind of doing the funding and then the oversight for participatory science projects? Like, is it just CDPHE? Is it other state agencies? An idea that has been brought forward in some of the comments that you'll see in the draft tomorrow is that there could be some sort of centralized agency in charge of environmental justice across state government. So that could be an option, but really want to like get into, that came from the Colorado Energy Office comments, so Dominique, but really want to like, you know, delve into that who question, because the more specific we can make the recommendations, the easier it is for us to then implement them. If we know kind of who we're talking about and how much money they are thinking and how they're going to allocate it.
Oh no, we can't hear you at all now, Uni. I think, yeah, I think we've asked you to finagle with your headset a little too much. Now we can't hear you at all. While Uni gets that troubleshooted, any other thoughts on kind of specifying agencies?
So I don't think it should be solely CDPHE. I think that there needs to be some cross-agency person managing all of this.
And just to clarify, Sheila, so like some sort of like an initiative or person or entity that kind of looks at participatory science project funding at large for the entire state.
Right. And I'm not sure if that would live in the Gov's office or if that would make sense.
And Sheila, the term we're going to use elsewhere in the recommendations for that cross-agency coordinating body is the Environmental Justice Coordinating Entity, which we could probably come up with a better term, but that's kind of what we've got now. So that's why I've added that, is that's kind of what we've used for like similar recommendations and like the best practices for community engagement section or the equity analysis section in TBD, if that is created, where would it live? But probably something like the Gov's office or an offshoot of the Gov's office, like the Colorado Energy Office currently is. So
yeah, exactly. Because, you know, well, okay, no, I'm not going to say what I was going to say. I'm going to.
Well, feel free to elaborate on your thoughts, Sheila. We welcome that. Velma, I see your hand is up, and in the spirit of this being a small community meeting and not having a public comment, I do want to give you the opportunity to speak. So feel free to come off mute. Okay, and then.
Well, there we go. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and I apologize for arriving late due to other commitments. So I hope my comments are not too duplicative of things that have already been said. I'm very interested in the subject of community science and participatory science as part of the regulatory process. I think it's one of the most important components of community engagement and meaningful community involvement. So while I am understanding the discussion of cross-agency coordination, because participatory and community science is kind of a new issue or new animal, so to speak. I want to ask the subcommittee and the task force to be cognizant of the need not to silo community or participatory science away from other science as it's involved in the regulatory process. Otherwise, it will just end up being, it won't be as effective, and it won't be the tool that it could be for community involvement in the process. I have long comments that I think I submitted previously with a bunch of references about definitions of community and participatory science, and I'm happy to resubmit those if it might be useful.
Velma, I think that's a great point, and we did read your comments, and I think did a good job of building them into the draft. You provided really great specific details, so hopefully you see some of your ideas reflected throughout the draft as we get to that next version tomorrow. I do think, to your point, that was kind of already discussed earlier. That I think that was a point that Sheila raised. Is this thing that we added here reflect your ideas? Yeah, thumbs up.
Awesome, thanks, Velma. Uni?
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, crystal clear, it's great.
She can be taught, as my kids say. As we're having this conversation about funding, I'm seeing like two different needs. You have these external groups, that come from various research institutions or, external to the community. And I think what we're asking is, in order for them to do research in the community, they have to form partnerships with some local group, or they have to have some kind of partnership there. That funding typically comes from the university's sources or wherever they're getting their money from. Then there's the other tranche, the third graders. I'm going to use that example of the third graders because I really like that. And in order for the third graders to do the research they need to do, is they need to get money from somewhere. I think that's partial of our what we're having here. And I'm not sure how Colorado is kind of leveraging the Justice 40 program in terms of getting funds from the administration and the project and the money that's available through the EPA and all these different funding sources to support equity research and environmental justice research. I just saw another announcement today of, I think, $50 million or something like that. So whether you set up an entity, or I'm not sure how the state is working on acquiring some of those funds, because I think you have to be an agency in order to access that money. And some of that money can go directly towards some of these research projects.
So glad you brought that up, Uni. So there isn't always a clear pathway for us to know what is and isn't Justice 40 funding, but we meet regularly with our counterparts at EPA and try to have a good sense of what funds are coming, and then try to identify the types of groups who could apply. So Velma has been part of one of those groups who we really reached out to, knowing that there was a need for additional air monitoring in Pueblo under a Justice 40 eligible grant program from last year from the EPA that didn't work out for that application. And with the specific grant you mentioned yesterday, it actually came out, I think, 2 weeks ago now. EJ Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center grants, which is a mouthful. We've been hard at work as the EJ program at CDPHE, sort of with our new grant specialist, Gabi Baim, summarizing the grant opportunity. We brainstormed eligible entities and then have been emailing them individually of like, hey, do you know that this is out there? You should think about applying with kind of our summaries. So it's a little ad hoc, but I guess I would just say, yeah, it's a priority for us to try to capture that funding in Colorado where we can. And actually that specific grant, it's not really aimed at state agencies. It's actually aimed more at like universities as the sort of funding entities. So, we've been reaching out to our universities that serve DI communities like CSU Pueblo and trying to get in touch with Fort Lewis College and other places to ensure they're aware. So, but yeah, that's a really great flag. And I don't know where that fits in the recommendations exactly, but it's great feedback that maybe we should keep doing that in our work to try to, leverage the Justice 40 funding however possible.
Nini, did you want to elaborate on that anymore?
Yeah. I do know some states, I can't think of right off the top of my head, or there are some NGOs that are deliberately setting up like accelerators or groups that have the grant writers on staff to help communities get Justice 40 funds. So I don't know if this would be a recommendation for the state to maybe set up like a satellite office or something, or a program under, I think Justice 40 has technical assistance grant money as well to help communities apply for Justice 40 grants, because it would be a shame if Colorado missed out, the Colorado communities missed out on that. So I think as we're talking about potential funding sources, I think we just need to list Justice 40 as one of them, and then maybe have a recommendation somewhere or a point that we discuss how we can help the communities access Justice 40 grants.
Thanks. And Sheila, I see you elaborating on that point a little bit. I wasn't sure if you wanted to share further.
Yeah, just that, I don't know if NSF funds any community or, citizen science work. I mean, it is so biased toward academic institutions. And so you need to have a dedicated office that's identifying these sources of funding.
So it sounds like maybe to kind of the broader point of like elaborating on the function of this environmental justice coordinating entity would be to have part of their role be kind of providing an overview of like what funding sources exist and technical assistance to community members on how to better connect to those funding sources.
Yeah, and I think it's broader than just Justice 40. I mean, it's somebody that can help communities apply for all kinds of funding from different sources, and then that can support that community-based research piece that we've been talking about.
Thanks, Uni. And I don't want to get too meta about this, but one of those Justice 40 opportunities is the Technical Assistance Center grants that I was just talking about. And so that again would not be a state agency if an entity in Colorado is awarded that funding, but it could fill that role of providing technical assistance to community groups who apply for Justice 40 and other, as I understand it, grant opportunities. So among other roles. So yeah, I hope the more we talk about it, the more we're kind of spreading interest or raising ideas about eligible entities that could apply in Colorado, because that's a really critical role.
Any other thoughts on this question of who should manage allocating funding to participatory science projects? It sounds like we are kind of, and if there's consensus around this, when we talk about who, we don't want to name specific agencies, rather, as the task force, you all are suggesting that there should be an EJ coordinating entity. Is there general consensus around that? Anybody want to further elaborate? Renee, I see your hand is raised. I wasn't sure if that was like a vote yes, or if you wanted to keep contributing.
I just want to add the importance of education in a lot of participatory science projects. I cannot talk today. Sorry, I'm still recovering from COVID. The reason I say that is because we're trying to expand data, and a lot of communities are going to be left out in the same way of even understanding how it applies to them too. And I think investing in some form of education, understanding where the data intersects here and how to long-term support it among state and federal agencies should be addressed here too. So some form of education, highlighting education or educating on it should be included.
Renee, in terms of where that could go in the recommendations, based on your previous feedback, we have built in a lot of discussion about sort of educational institutions or schools being the recipients of funds for participatory research or conducting that research. Are you kind of, is that what you're getting at, or do you think that you're kind of a separate, or are you raising a separate thought? I want to make sure we're capturing it in the draft.
No, that too as well. Thank you. And then even adult education as well. We have a lot of adult community scientists in some ways that they would be helpful in helping collect data, but they too can also use in knowledge-based systems or being able to be included in this space with equity. So being mindful that it shouldn't just be projected at just the youth, but how can we engage community and different populations within community and also support them?
So I don't know if I would trust traditional academic institutions to provide this education.
Exactly.
Because once again, they're rooted in the dominant culture. So, I mean, I might ask a department, you know, maybe a particular department that is, well, that truly centers equity to do this work. Or, as I said, other non-traditional organizations to do some of this educating. But I don't know if I would go to an R01 university and ask them to do this.
I agree exactly. It's maintaining a form of equity and education and knowing that that's not seen in institutions as well. So how can we support community involvement with education and data so that they can still maintain it from their own self-determination and context, again, in a way that state and federal agencies might not necessarily see, i.e. trauma or cultural or
Sheila and Renee, but maybe mostly Sheila, do you think we need to reword this here? I think, I can't remember what commenter, but some commenter said, you know, it shouldn't just be community organizations, it should be like educational institutions like schools that do participatory science. But I realize the term educational institution is broad. So do you think we should cut educational institution and just have it say like schools, basically, or to sort of avoid bringing in that university angle, or what are your thoughts there on kind of the draft as it's written?
So, I mean, for instance, I think community colleges should be engaged with this, because community colleges traditionally have been, have served first generation students, students of color, et cetera, tribal universities, minority serving institutions. And then, you know, I'm thinking of organizations like Servicios, or you know, that have a history of serving disproportionately impacted communities, of doing some of this work. And then when you get into school districts, yes, I mean, it would be, I would love to see school districts do this education. But we're also living in the era where, you know, Toni Morrison is banned. And so, yes, you could say school districts, but there's, you're gonna have to word it in a way that won't raise red flags.
Is the rewording we put there a better way to do that? So community organizations and educational institutions like schools, community colleges, and minority serving universities or tribal colleges. Is that, did I accurately capture that? And we would obviously replicate that in the other sections as appropriate.
I like it. I want to hear what other people think, though.
So yeah, if folks have comments on specifically this, the wording of this recommendation or how it should be elaborated on, please feel free to come off mute.
Yeah, since I commented, this is Velma, since I commented on it earlier, I do see, I really appreciate Sheila and Uni's discussion of this. I think you're right on target. And I think that the language is getting very close to the true collaborative nature that participatory science should represent. I think it is, if it's not clear, then a word or two might be able to be added, that if the primary grantee is an educational institution, that they should be in partnership with community organizations. And I think that you do have the funding may be provided to both, but it's not clear to me whether there's a form of participatory science largely found in the university settings where involving the community as subjects of the research is considered participatory science. And I really hope that the model that comes out of this will have the community organizations in leadership roles in these grants with the educational institutions, if any, that are involved. I want to see a partnership, not a, as Dr. Wilson says, a helicopter science.
Thanks for that, Velma. Okay, and then I just wanted to also point out the fact, Beatrice, you put a comment in the chat about I would recommend state match Justice 40 grants, so disproportionately impacted communities get state funding as well, not just federal funding. And kind of directly related to this topic about managing and allocating funding, is that something that we want to build in, of like the idea of matching funds? Because I do think that that could be its own kind of bullet point.
I don't know if it's necessarily matching, because funds go for different purposes, but what I'm thinking is, how do we ensure that state investments are also kind of in the same spirit of Justice 40, is going to disproportionately impacted communities. And then even if we look at our own environmental screen, 40% of Colorado is actually disproportionately impacted. So it's just ensuring that these communities get their fair share. And I see it more as the floor, not the ceiling. So if we wanted to be even more ambitious and match, I think that's amazing. But even if we just safeguard state investments to go to those communities as well, I think that's fair.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, that gets into the next question of, will disproportionately impacted communities be prioritized in funding allocations? And if so, how specifically should this be accomplished? So thanks for providing some suggestions there. Uni?
Yeah, I was just going to go back to the previous conversation on where we talked about educational institutions like community colleges and MSIs and tribal colleges. Are we talking about educational institutions that are located in DIC communities? Is that kind of where we are at, or just generally across the board? Because that may differentiate the two. Because in my mind, I'm thinking about the community colleges that serve DICs, a DIC, and not just a community college that's somewhere in Aspen or some, you know what I mean? That could actually get the funding. Are we thinking about a community college that's a technical community college that's supporting, that's in a community, and most of the, the attendees come from the community? And so I don't know, I think I'm just getting a little bit nitpicky on this, but I feel like from, in my perspective, from the industry perspective, we are very sensitive about the how we identify the communities that benefit from support.
So the reason why I named or singled out community colleges is because they tend to be located and serve DIC communities. I don't think there's an Aspen Community College, so that's kind of why I'm going with the community colleges. I have to jump off. I hope to see you next week.
Yes, thank you. I think we also have another 4 o'clock meeting that us EJ program staff need to tend to. So, Uni, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just celebrating. Are we ending? I'm still in the office. So, yeah, because I might have to jump off. It's also 6 o'clock for me here. Okay,
yeah, we are ending. I will just say that the task force members on the subcommittee have edit access to this document. So if, while stuff is still fresh in, the next hour or tomorrow morning, if you want to edit this document directly or just want to put in comments or send me an email, that feedback would be much appreciated. I think one area that we didn't really dive much into is that last section of data collection and modernization, section F of the recommendation. So if there's any thoughts there, especially in wake of the conversation that we're talking about with the EJ entity, please do share your thoughts there. All right, sorry to end so abruptly. I think the time just flew by, but thanks all for all of your input. I think this is a really productive meeting and definitely feel better about this section going into next week's meeting. So I hope to see all of you in person on Wednesday evening for the public comment session. And if not, then on Thursday morning. So thanks so much. Bye all.
I'll see you.
Thank you, loves. Be well.
Bye.